Okay. Good afternoon or evening, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to Exploring the Lord of the Rings, our special early day edition. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, a little after 2 o'clock in the afternoon here on the East Coast. And we are starting early today. We haven't done this in a while, for which I feel guilty now. I've been forgetting, as we wanted to do this fairly regularly, but we've lost track of it because we want to do at least the occasional class in a Europe friendly time. I know we're always broadcasting every week in the middle of the night for our friends over in Europe, so it's fun to do one at least every now and again. For the benefit of folks who are several hours ahead of us here on the East Coast. And I saw the comment from that one of the Californians. I think it was Art News, who was saying that it's nice to have class not in the middle of dinner time, which I understand also there. So anyway, glad to be with you here today. And good to see some of you guys. I'm seeing you in the Twitch chat, and I'm seeing you on Discord. So thanks for everybody who is able to join us here. And of course, I have the Twitter feed going here as well. So anyway, welcome. I just wanted to introduce Estelle Ali, who is my host here this evening. And let me see if I can unmute you here on... let me see. Okay. I'm not quite sure how to do it. Okay. I think, I don't know how to change your permissions, actually. Oh, well. That's awkward. Because I wanted him to be able to talk later. Let's see. Oh, sorry there, Ellie. I'm trying to sort that out, but I don't know how. Hey, Druid's Fire, I don't know. I don't suppose you know how to give Estelle Ali permission to unmute here in the lore hall, do you? That would be handy. In Discord, I mean. Of course. But, yeah. I'll tell you what, let's, we'll work on that. And, yeah. See what, see if we can get you unmuted in time for the field trip today. Yeah. In the meantime, so I don't know how to do this. So somebody figure out how to help me give somebody permission to unmute in this channel, because I don't know how to do that. Anyway, all right, we'll sort that out. All right, so I'll just start that in that case. So let's get going. So tonight we are going to go back to Weathertop, right? You may remember that we were looking at Frodo staring off into the distance, and I was comparing that to the moment when Bilbo looks off into the distance, off thinking about Hobbiton, and we were thinking about the differences there, right? The kind of much more simple longing that Bilbo had in his mind when he was thinking back towards, thinking those Baggins-ish thoughts about going home, and wishing he were back there sitting next to his fire with the kettle just beginning to sing. And Frodo's feelings, which are similar as he looks back longingly towards the Shire, but quite different, as he thinks of himself, of course, of going into exile, of going there and not back again, and never coming back again, as far as he can tell. And of course, it's particularly poignant that in that moment, right, as he's looking back and thinking about how the shadow has come into his life and separated him from the Shire, what does he see but Ringwraiths, right, on the road between him and the Shire, as he's, his sort of reverie looking off towards the Shire, even his sad reverie, is interrupted by the actual physical presence of the Ringwraiths on the road down below him as he's looking off in that direction. So that's that's the moment when we stopped last time, and then everybody flattening themselves on the top of the hill. So my goal tonight, is to get as far as up to the poem. Obviously, we're not going to start the poem tonight. Way too much to talk about. But I want to see how close we can get to the beginning of the poem. I will have succeeded if we get all the way up to it, but that would be pretty ambitious. So we'll see. Anyway, we'll get as close as we can. But first, I wanted to make some announcements. First, I wanted to thank everybody who came out to Baymoot this past weekend. I just got back the day before yesterday from the San Francisco Bay Area. And that was really, really, that was so awesome. I had such a great time. We had a wonderful conference. It's so good to meet so many of you. Really neat to get to see. And I hope, many of you whom I met came up and told me the screen names that you're using here in the Twitch chat and on Discord, so that I would know which one you were from our discussions. Got to meet several of our regulars there, and that was great fun. Again, thanks for coming out, and it was wonderful, which makes me want to point out that we have a bunch more regional moots coming up, and I really hope that everybody who's listening, both who's here with me live today and who's listening asynchronously later on, will make a point of being able to come out to the moot nearest you, because we're spreading them around as liberally as we can this year. We are looking to do at least 8, possibly even 9, but at least 8 regional moots this year. There's going to be lots and lots of opportunities for you to come out if you haven't yet, or even if you have. Well, I want to see you again. So here are the ones that are coming up. Here are the ones that are scheduled now. The next one is Middle Moot. That's for folks right smack in the middle of America. We're going to be at Kansas City, Missouri. So Kansas City, Missouri on October 6th. So I hope that you will be able to find us there. Let me show you the where did it go? Our page here. Oh, sorry, there it is. Okay. So we've got both the links to our next 2 moots already here. Middle Moot, as I say, October 6th in Parkville, Missouri, right outside of Kansas City. And then on October 27th, LA Moot, out in LA or near LA. Fairly easy to get to from LA, as I understand. The location carefully chosen by Los Angeles natives in order to make sure that I didn't make any foolish traffic recommendations on the venue. So anyway, that's gonna be really cool. And I know what Dev was not there. I know that we started off closer to the Midwest, and we're sort of gravitating away from the Midwest and shifting down to Kansas City for Middle Moot this year. I'm working on that. It's actually kind of funny how we're beginning to sort of orbit the sort of the heart of the Midwest and not be in the middle of it. But we're looking to amend that. We'll do what we can in future times. But for now, this is what we got. So as I say, so two coming up in October. Middle Moot, October 6th. LA Moot, October 27th. And then on November 10th, we have Magnolia Moot down in the Southeast. And that's going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina. November 10th, as I said. We don't have the information posted on that one yet, but we will very soon. In addition, we have Tex Moot Part 2. We had our first Tex Moot last year, and we have our second Tex Moot coming up this year, and that's going to be on January 19th in Waco, Texas. So we have 4 scheduled and planned moots, 2 of which have the registration open already. They're Middle Moot in Kansas City and LA Moot. Both of them have registration open, so if you click on either one of these, click on LA Moot here, just click the Join This Event button, and you can register right away. So anyhow, so that's what we have coming up. We have several other prospects for the spring. Definitely hoping to get out to Europe again, by the way, speaking of being in the Europe-friendly time. Still working out need to work out the details of that, but I definitely want to be headed over there again sometime this spring. And then we're also looking at a couple other things, possibly Seattle, possibly New York City. So we're working on a bunch of things. Anyway, so Lapland moot, probably not, but we're working on it. So there are lots and lots of opportunities. As I say, we're looking to do 8 or 9 of them during this coming year, and then I'm hoping to add another 3 or so for next year. We are going to be doing a New England moot. That's definitely something that we're planning now. I'm not sure of the date and when that's going to be. It might still be a little while, but we're still working on it. Anyway, just wanted to let you guys know, because this has been such a fun opportunity. I can't even tell you. We've had 4 of them now, 4 of our regional moots already since the beginning of last year. It has been so much fun. It's so cool to go out and connect with folks in a part of the country where we've never had an event before, and be able to put faces to names and get to hang out with folks. And the event itself is really, really cool. Baymoot was so fantastic. So anyway, we have, we'll have lots of opportunities. So anyway, thanks everybody for, again, thanks to the Baymoot folks for coming out. The other thing I wanted to draw your attention to quickly was a thing I scrolled past fast. In honor, it was H.P. Lovecraft's birthday yesterday, so in honor of the birthday of H.P. Lovecraft, Signum has put our Anytime Audit on sale for the course we have on him. And I don't know if you know about the Anytime Audit program, but it's pretty awesome. All of the courses in our course catalog, pretty much every course we've ever offered, is available for Anytime Audit. So if you missed it and you want to sit in on it, you basically just kind of can listen to the class lectures like an audiobook. You can watch them on your tablet. Both the video and the audio links are there. All the course materials as well, so you can see all the readings, and so you can do the readings and listen to the lectures, and it's really cool. So basically, any of the things out of our vault that you missed that we offered years ago, and there are very, very many, you can sign up to audit anytime, and it's really cheap. It's $95 per class, the tuition for that. And we have, of course, we're running a special right now on our HP Lovecraft class because it's his birthday, right? Gotta give a discount on the man's birthday. So Lovecraft is an experience, right? I mean, if you've not experienced Lovecraft, you should experience Lovecraft. It's pretty interesting. It really is. And yes, Kate, you're absolutely right. Dr. Amy Sturgis was the lecturer in this course. She is fantastic. If you've never taken a course with Amy Sturgis, you owe it to yourself to take that class. So anyway, that definitely something else I wanted to draw your attention to. Just go to the Signum webpage and click on this link, and it'll take you to the sign-up form for the Anytime Audit. If you want to look at our other classes to see about maybe auditing something else, just go to our course catalog here, and you can under courses and chats, and you can see a list of all the courses we've ever done, and just go through, look at each one, and so like our awesome Tolkien and Tradition class, for instance, and then you can just click through to Anytime Audit, the Anytime Audit button down there. So Verlyn Flieger's Tolkien and Tradition class, that was so awesome. So glad that she did that for us. Okay, anyway, that's the story. Those are today's announcements. Exactly, Sam. Lovecraft's 128th birthday was yesterday. That's pretty. You see, he's past Bilbo now. So, all right. Let's move forward then. Let's go back to the text. So the Ringwraiths are closing in. As I said, we just had Frodo looking off into the distance and seeing the Ringwraiths down below. So what do you do when you're sitting around waiting for the Ringwraiths to come hunt you down? And that's what we're going to see here tonight. All right, so when they get back down to the bottom of Weathertop, Sam and Peregrine had not been idle. They had explored the small dell and the surrounding slopes. Not far away, they found a spring of clear water in the hillside, and near it footprints, not more than a day or two old. In the dell itself they found recent traces of a fire and other signs of a hasty camp. There were some fallen rocks on the edge of the dell, nearest to the hill. Behind them, Sam came upon a small store of firewood neatly stacked. "I wonder if old Gandalf has been here," he said to Pippin. "Whoever it was put this stuff here meant to come back, it seems." Strider was greatly interested in these discoveries. "I wish I had waited and explored the ground down here myself," he said, hurrying off to the spring to examine the footprints. "It is just as I feared," he said when he came back. "Sam and Pippin have trampled the soft ground, and the marks are spoilt or confused. Rangers have been here lately. It is they who left the firewood behind. But there are also several newer tracks that were not made by rangers. I cannot now be certain, but I think there were many booted feet." He paused and stood in anxious thought. Okay, Matt, I would be interested in keeping track of when Pippin is called Peregrine. We did a little bit before in my, I think, I'm trying to remember when that was. I think it was when I did my Mythgard Academy class on the Return of the King. That we were talking about that, and somebody made actually a graph of it, like the number of times Pippin is called Pippin and when he's called Peregrine. I remember when we were looking at the data at the time, it didn't scream out obvious relevance, but it feels like it should be relevant. It feels like something that could be or perhaps should be important, and I'm not really sure what to make of that yet. Especially now in this case, Strider says Sam and Pippin have trampled the soft ground, so he's calling him Pippin. One even wonders if has Pippin, like, has Strider probably knows that his real name is Peregrine, right? Probably, but I think he's introduced as Pippin. I'm not sure to what extent, I'm thinking, is Strider even familiar with that name yet? Would even know to call him that? Has he known him long enough to know what his real name is? Because everybody calls him Pippin. But it's definitely, I would be interested to see as we go through if there's a correlation there. So, because it's mostly Pippin by default, but we will definitely see if we notice any interesting correlations with when he's called Peregrine. It could possibly be a signal of shift in narrators. That's possible. I'm not sure. It seems to me more likely to be somebody who is to be a shift in the sort of social context of the comment, right? Rather than a change in narrators, but it's possible. Anyway, okay, so, and I want to say hi to the guy on Twitter from Turkey, in appreciating our live participation here in Europe friendly time. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Yeah. So the question people were asking about what we're referring to here. The interesting thing is the narrator. Oops. Sorry. I'm just like trying to highlight things instead of moving my window around. Sam and Peregrine had not been idle. And that is interesting. So Matt, I do find it especially intriguing when the narrator uses Peregrine, because that strikes me as particularly unusual, right? When it's used in dialogue, that's one thing. And I do sort of suspect that when it's used in dialogue, it tells us more about the sort of tone or context of that comment, right? When they're going out of their way to call him by his full name instead of calling him by his normal nickname, that kind of has to mean something, right? But when the narrator does it, it's different. Yeah. Anyway, I'm not sure what to make of it. Especially since that is the narrator, shifts, right? He said to Pippin, we get right down in the next paragraph. So there doesn't really seem to be any obvious sense to that, right? It might just be for variety, an occasional reminder, right? But yeah, and Balancemond, you're right, to see, for us to also do a similar comparison between Mary and Mariotic and Samwise, right? And again, here especially in the narrator's voice, not in dialogue. Yeah, Matt is wondering if it correlates with Findegil, the king's writer, right? Because we know that the manuscript received much annotation in Gondor, and since Pippin is so much better known in Gondor, one could imagine, right, a scribe who is copying the Red Book going out of his way to refer to him as Peregrine, right, which is probably how the scribe would think of him, Peregrine of the Shire. So that is interesting. Okay. So here's the thing I would like to see. If I were trying to come up with a data set, here's the data set I would want. Again, excluding dialogue, which is tricky, right? So I would want to exclude the names used in dialogue for now. That's a different question and interesting on itself. But for this question, the number of times the names Sam, Samwise, Pippin, Peregrine, Mary, Mariotic, all 6 of those names, the number of times those names are used by the narrator, not in dialogue, and what is the what's the relative percentage of those? So what percentage of the time the Took character is referred to? Is he called Pippin versus Peregrine? And the percentages of Sam versus Samwise and Mary versus Mariotic, again in the voice of the narrator, to see if it's true, Matt. Because I would think if Findegil, King's writer, is responsible for that, right, then you'd think that it would come up more with Peregrine, right? That Mary would be Mariotic and Sam would be Samwise a smaller percentage of the time than Pippin would be Peregrine, right? But it would be interesting to see. Okay, so that's I would be interested in seeing that data set if anybody is interested in delving for that. It would be tricky. You'd have to do a bunch of it by hand, right, to exclude all the examples in dialogue. But anyway, okay, cool, great question. That's really interesting. Okay, so let's keep going. What else was I want to talk about with this? So, trying to recreate what has happened until Strider speaks his piece about Rangers, right? When he says Rangers have been here lately, in context, it sounds like he doesn't mean that in response to, he's not saying that he saw that by the stream, right? I take Sam and Pippin have trampled the soft ground and the marks are spoilt or confused to mean that he cannot draw any conclusions based on the ground by the pool, right, by the well. But he so when he says Rangers have been here lately, he seems to be concluding that from seeing the firewood, right? It is they who left the firewood behind. He sounds very confident about that, right? He doesn't, we've seen him be fairly diffident most of the time, right, when making his observations. I mean, just remember what we were talking about last week with when he was up on top of Weathertop and interpreting the signs that he saw there, right? He seems quite confident in these signs. And that, by the way, is the number one reason why I personally disbelieve the idea that the runes that, sort of the indicators that Gandalf has written on the rock here are some kind of accepted rune shorthand that Aragorn knows how to interpret, right? I don't believe that. And the reason I don't believe that is that Aragorn does not speak like somebody who is reading a plain message in a language or a cipher or something that he understands. He speaks as someone who is interpreting, right? Who is making his best guess at what signs and symbols that he has come across probably mean. And that's very different from saying like, oh yeah, no, I know this code. This is what that means, right? He's diffident. And here he's not diffident, which leads me to suspect that he recognizes that, like, the wood, the location, the way that, I don't know what it is, the way that it's packed, the way that it's concealed, the place that it's concealed. Is this an accepted, like, common ranger hiding spot for firewood? Do rangers, when they come through here, often hide firewood in that particular spot, so that, he as soon as he sees firewood there, he's like, oh yeah, rangers, right? Because he doesn't even seem to open up the possibility that it's Gandalf, which is what it sounds like when we hear the description, right? That first paragraph, footprints not more than a day or two old, recent traces of a fire, other signs of a hasty camp, some fallen rocks on the edge of the dell nearest to the hill, right? All of those things, I'm immediately thinking about Gandalf, right? We just saw evidence that he was up on the hill, right? So so the idea that he had camped here before going up onto Weathertop makes some sense, right? So that they would see evidence of his camp, recent traces of a fire in the fire pit, that there would be footprints, that he would have gotten water. Even the fallen rocks on the edge of the dell nearest to the hill is interesting, right? Does that suggest that he came down that hill in a hurry, right? So you can imagine him coming from Weathertop down into the dell to run, right? Did he leave his horse down here? Presumably he would have left his horse. Ranger and the Ranger, Mr. Ranger, Strider and Frodo and Merry seem to have left their horses, right, with Pippin and Sam down at the bottom of the hill. So, Sam and Peregrine, I should say. So presumably Gandalf would have done so too. I don't think he would have dragged his horse all the way up to the top of Weathertop. So presumably he left his horse tied down here, and would have come after he escaped from the Black Riders, would have come down the side of the hill in rather a hurry, right, and picked up his horse and taken off. So, that's my temptation there. But Strider doesn't seem to be thinking about that at all, right? Well, I don't know about it all, but he immediately says, rangers have been here lately. It is they who left the firewood behind, he says confidently. But there are also several newer tracks that were not made by rangers. At least one set was made only a day or two ago by heavy boots. Is that Gandalf? That could very well be Gandalf. At least one, he says. I cannot now be certain, but I think there were many booted feet, which seems likely, right? So does this show his pursuit by the Ringwraiths now at that point? And notice notice how he starts being diffident again right away, right? Strider is pretty cautious about committing himself to an interpretation of facts. So notice these trends that we're observing in sort of how Strider operates, right? A lot of the time when he is making an interpretation, when he's just putting facts together and trying to guess at what happened, he tends to not speak very confidently. He tends to not say, okay, I'm sure this is what must have happened, right? He leaves it very open and qualifies it a lot. Things like, I cannot now be certain, but, right? Even when we know he has great skill, but he doesn't, trade on that, right? He doesn't make big assertions based on his skill. Others will speak very confidently about his skill. He does not speak very confidently about his skill. So I think that's a really important thing, right? Yeah. Oh, hey, I see that note there sorry, my phone's far away. I can't see your name very well. I saw that note on Twitter. Send me an email about that or a private message on Twitter, and we'll see if we can talk more about that. So, yeah, Allegretta, it does seem to me to be... I think it's more about a lack of arrogance than a lack of dishonesty. It's not about dishonesty. It's about overconfidence, right? Asserting himself too clearly. We saw even in decision-making, he was cautious. He was sort of somewhat diffident, right? That is, he was thinking about, when he's thinking through whether or not they should go to Weathertop, right? And talking about this stuff with Frodo, he was kind of leaving it open, asking for their advice. He was, he did say what he, in the end, whether he thought they should do, but he did not just, sort of strike out and say, I'm sure this is the right thing to do. But again, we do see sometimes when he speaks differently. That's why the finding of the firewood seems to me interesting. And I kind of, it's hard for me not to put that in a different category, because he's not being at all diffident about that. He speaks very confidently. Rangers have been here lately. It is they who left the firewood behind. If that's how he talked all the time, if he were always that confident about his conclusions, that would be one thing. But he's not. Aragorn does not talk like Sherlock Holmes. Right? Sherlock Holmes talks like he knows exactly what happened and he has no doubts about his conclusions, right? Unless he, has real reason to think that he hasn't gotten all the data yet or something. But anyway, yeah, he's remarkably careful about that. And I think that's an interesting thing to watch, an interesting thing, especially as we'll begin to see some more trends developing in Aragorn's sort of analysis and decision making, as we'll see as we move through. Yeah, it is possible. Ali says, I think it might be because he was with the hobbits and maybe he hasn't had interactions with them before and is treading cautiously. If he was alone, he might be more confident. After all, he tracked down Gollum. Yeah, I don't think so. I don't necessarily think that we need to take this as a sign of Aragorn actually having like confidence problems, right? Of him not believing in his own abilities, right? I don't think we have an Aragorn here who's like, racked with self-doubt. That seems to me not, that reading I think certainly doesn't seem to be necessary at this time. That would be a pretty strong reading. I don't think we have enough to support a reading that sort of radical, right? What we do see is caution, which could just as well be humility, right? Aragorn just not going beyond the facts, right? He is saying, I think that there were many booted feet, right? He can't prove it. He's not 100% sure. So he's not going to say more than what he knows, more than what he's sure of. Which again suggests to me that he's super sure about the firewood for some reason. Anyway, cool. Nick is wondering if it could be his anxiety based on what he thinks has happened to Gandalf. Yeah, remember, I'm pretty convinced now, after our recent classes, that his desire to try to get more information about what happened to Gandalf is one of the things that has really driven him to come to Weathertop in the first place. I think that his excitement to see, and that seemed to me confirmed in last week's reading, because he finally gets up to the top and he does, we do look at the view, right? We do spend some time looking at the view, but Aragorn doesn't spend that much time looking at the view, right? Aragorn spends time looking at the ground on top of the hill. That's the view that he's come to see, is the close-up view of what happened here on the top of the hill, because he knows something did. He's known that for a couple of days, ever since he saw the flashes of light in the darkness, and now he wants to try and figure it out, such that he chides himself for being so anxious about tidings for Gandalf that he forgot himself, right, and has allowed them to stand at the top of the hill where they could be seen from a distance. So yeah. Oh, yes, and Nitesh, absolutely, we are on Brandywine, and we will be doing our field trip afterwards. Yep, still happening. Okay. Yes, Nick, or perhaps what happened to whoever was fighting Gandalf. This is interesting, right? Because, we were talking about how, sure, it's useful for him to know a little bit more about where the enemy is, right? But I was saying that doesn't actually make much sense when it comes to standing up on the hilltop and looking around. They do, in fact, see some Ringwraiths from the top of the hill, but that was kind of lucky, right? If luck you call it. But it's not like he could really have expected that a view of the countryside from the top of the hill was going to show up the Ringwraiths to them necessarily. And even still, it only shows up 5, the ones that they see that happen to be down there on the road right below them when they're up at the top. However, like I said, it's not like that was a high yield option, for scouting the enemy when the enemy is a handful of shadowy creatures who could be in the woods at any time, right, and not visible from the top of the hill. However, the other thing, what's much more important, since he can be fairly confident that they were there on top of Weathertop, then he can learn much more. Did they win? Did they lose? What happened? Did they chase Gandalf away? Did they carry Gandalf away? Those things, answers to those questions, which he might be able to answer after he looks at the hill, would give him a good deal more information about what they, the hobbits, could very likely expect once they leave Weathertop again. Notice also, by the way, Strider chiding himself. He doesn't yell at the hobbits, right? He doesn't blame Sam and Pippin for messing up the footprints, even though perhaps it would have been better for them to have sort of been a little bit more careful when they noticed that there were footprints not more than a day or two old. Those are presumably their observations that we're getting in that first paragraph, right? But they don't, but he doesn't yell at them, right? Instead, he chides himself. I wish I had waited and explored the ground down here myself, right? Once again, he thinks he's made a mistake, right? Aragorn does not seem to think much of most of his decisions after the fact. Belangsmon is wondering if Aragorn might be starting to feel the dread as the Nazgûl are in the area. Possibly. But I think probably not yet. Anyway, let's keep looking here. Okay. Each of the hobbits saw in his mind a vision of the cloaked and booted riders. If the horsemen had already found the Dell, the sooner Strider led them somewhere else, the better. Sam viewed the hollow with great dislike, now that he had heard news of their enemies on the road only a few miles away. "Hadn't we better clear out quick, Mr. Strider?" he asked impatiently. "It's getting late, and I don't like this hole. It makes my heart sink somehow." "Yes, we must certainly decide what to do at once," answered Strider, looking up and considering the time and the weather. "Well, Sam," he said at last, "I do not like this place either, but I cannot think of anywhere better that we could reach before nightfall. At least we are out of sight for the moment, and if we moved, we should be much more likely to be seen by spies. All we could do would be to go right out of our way back north on this side of the line of hills, where the land is all much the same as it is here. The road is watched, but we should have to cross it if we tried to take cover in the thickets away to the south. On the north side of the road, beyond the hills, the country is bare and flat for miles." Okay. So Sam and Strider's interactions, right? Before we think about Strider's sort of particular advice here. If we look at how Sam addresses Strider here now, right? I really like how he calls him Mr. Strider, right? That's kind of particularly fun because he introduced himself as Strider explicitly with that as a pseudonym. Well, not exactly a pseudonym, not like a pseudonym he's taken for himself. He says, around here I am called Strider, right? It's obvious that's not his real name. We know his real name. His real name is Aragorn. It was revealed by him, and it was revealed by Gandalf in the letter, right? So they know his real name. They keep calling him Strider. And Sam calls him Mr. Strider, which is interesting because that's a sign of respect, right? He calls him Mr. Is he considering Strider to be like higher social class than he is himself, right? He's calling him Mr. Strider like he calls Frodo Mr. Frodo, right? And sometimes does call Pippin Mr. Pippin, right? We've seen that too. When Sam uses that, whereas, like, for instance, you will not see him calling Hob Hayward Mr., right? That's not going to happen, right? So he's Sam does not think he's speaking to his peer when he's talking to Aragorn, right? Yeah, not a cat exactly. He is according Strider more courtesy than he would Ted Sandyman, for sure. Absolutely. And, Kate is wondering if this is the first sign of respect from Sam, and it seems to be. Why? What prompted it? Is there something that, is there something in particular, around here that has changed? Kate's wondering if it could be a reaction to his skill in the Dell. Possibly. But I don't know. The sense that I have here, Wolfreg, that's exactly what I was about to say. Not so much respect of class, but acknowledging his position as their guide, and thus, to some extent, in a position of authority over them. Yeah, Wolfreg, that's exactly what I was about to say. When you look at the context of that sentence, or the sentence that Sam has just said, hadn't we better clear out quick, Mr. Strider? Right? He's asking, right? He's not saying, well, I think we better get out of here, right? He's not just offering his own opinion. He is asking, and he's deferring to Strider's opinion on this because Strider knows the land better. Strider is their guide, right? Hadn't we better? Now, notice he doesn't just ask it as an open question. Would it be a good idea for us to clear out quick, Mr. Strider? Right? He doesn't just offer it as a question which could expect the answer yes or no equally, right? Instead, he asks the question negatively, right? Meaning implying the answer is yes. Hadn't we better clean out quick? Yes, we had better clean out quick, hadn't we? Right? So he's asking the question forcefully in that way, as if there's only one obvious answer, right? And yet he's still asking it as a question. He's not just stating his opinion. He's not telling Strider what to do. He is still deferring to Strider as their guide, right? And to Strider's superior knowledge. So in that context, Wolfreg, that's just what I was thinking. You kind of think that it's sort of ingrained in Sam that when someone else is in that kind of position of sort of leadership, even temporary leadership over him, and in particular when it's somebody who is a stranger that he doesn't, he's not on familiar terms with, that he would call him Mr. by default. Good, Matt. Oh, that's excellent. Matt was recalling that he called him Mr. Strider back in Bree, but in a very different context. Mr. Strider may have an honest reason for spying and eavesdropping, but if so, I should advise him to explain it. You see, Matt, of course, that is sarcastic, right? When he calls him Mr. Strider there, he is showing him disrespect, essentially, right? Disrespect might be slightly strong, but he's being sarcastic there, right? Strider has shown himself to be a spy and an eavesdropper, right, by his own account there, right? And so referring to this questionable-looking stranger who has just admitted that he was spying on them and eavesdropping from the bushes while they were talking to Tom Bombadil, calling him Mr., right, that's more than just kind of backhanded, right? But yeah, Kate, I agree. Already lots of things have changed, right? I think that if we try to see Sam as being like still just as hostile to Strider now as he was, back at the Prancing Pony originally, right? I think that's doing Sam an injustice. He was right about they're not sleeping in their rooms at Bree, Kate, as you say, and he has gotten them through the wild so far. He's definitely living up to his side of the deal, and I'm sure that Sam respects his familiarity with the countryside. Remember, that's Sam, right? The statement about, Sam knew the land well within 20 miles of Hobbiton, but that was the limit of his geography. Remember that sentence? Often, when we read that sentence, the stress that we put is just on the latter part, right? Our take home from that sentence is often Sam only knows the land well within 20 miles of Hobbiton, right? He's never been outside. He's never been for more than 20 miles away from Hobbiton. And that's true. That is an important element of that sentence. But the first half of the sentence is important too. And you may remember that sentence comes up in Three is Company when it's Sam who's saying, there's a fir wood up next to the road up here, right? That would shelter us. So that's where we can stop. He's the one who's their guide. Within 20 miles of Hobbiton, he knows the land really well. And while they're there on that first night, he's their guide. And he's the one who is suggesting the likeliest camping spot and things like that. So obviously we are way beyond Sam's comfortable radius, so he doesn't serve himself as a guide. And yet he does seem to respect that. Right, he seems to respect that in Strider. I think that's, in a sense, it's something that he and Strider have in common, right? Just on very, very different scales, actually. And Ali, absolutely. It's not just Sam, right? All of them are all four of the hobbits are now further away from home than they've ever been, and all of them are relying on Strider. And so Sam's voicing of that is more he's the one who voices it openly. And I know there's going to be Frodo's testimony later on will suggest that he thinks that Sam was still skeptical, but keep in mind that's Frodo's interpretation, right? And even when Frodo says that, he's gonna say that a little bit whimsically, right? So let's not worry about that too much. Let's instead look at what we see from here. And that contrast that Matt was making about look at those two instances in which Sam calls him Mr. Strider, right? The first one clearly sarcastically in mockery, right? Or at least in serious question. This second time, his respect seems genuine. He seems to mean it when he calls him Mr. Strider now. Anyway, Bellongsmon points out that Sam could have rewritten it. Maybe. I am pretty resistant to the idea that Sam's going to rewrite anything that Frodo wrote in order to make himself, Sam, look better, right? I have a really hard time. It's going to take some convincing for me to be convinced of that. Yeah, good. Yeah, good. Okay, so let's, Ethelwald, I agree about the anxiety, right, as the Nazgûl are coming closer, and looking at Strider's reaction to that, I do think he's being very careful here. Notice, and Kate, you were talking about this before, and I forget who it was, I apologize, somebody on the discussion boards last week was talking about they really appreciate how Strider treats Sam, right? And I agree. I think that's very interesting. Yes, we must certainly decide what to do at once. Again, notice the we, right? He's not asserting authority, right? Yes, hang on a moment and I'll tell you what to do in a second, right? He's we must decide, he says. He's not claiming sole leadership of this expedition. And then he addresses Sam, right? Well, Sam, I do not like this place either, but I cannot think of anywhere better that we could reach before nightfall. Really good point, Matt. Matt points out that it's worth noticing that both of the times that we were just looking at that Sam calls Strider Mr. Strider, he's challenging him both times, right? The first time, a strong advice, and the second time when he's impatient. Yes, yeah, no, the parallelism of that makes it even stronger, right? Again, the difference in the tone becomes much more noticeable when both times he's challenging him, but in a very, very different way, right? Yeah, I think it's really good. Anyway, Strider chooses to show Sam respect, right? He responds back to Sam. I don't like this place either, right? I affirm what you say. He doesn't tell him, oh, don't be ridiculous, Sam, or, oh, Sam, you're so inexperienced, you have no idea, right? This is a much better spot than it seems like to you, right? Trust me, I'm the one who knows. That's not at all how Strider talks to him. He could, but he doesn't. And I do think that that is important. He does treat Sam with respect. He seems to understand Sam's value, right? The ways in which when Sam is speaking up, he's speaking up on behalf of his master, right? He is defending Frodo, and Strider seems to get that. But of course, we're skipping there for a second what Sam actually says, apart from "hadn't we better clear out quick, Mr. Strider," right? It is getting late, and I don't like this hole. He is now characterizing this Dell, which seemed fairly promising, right? Beforehand. That is, if you, whoops, sorry, too fast. If you look back at this first paragraph, at this first description of the camp and all the different traces and things, that it sounds snug and cozy and nice. Nobody seems to hate it, right? There at the beginning. Now he's calling it a hole, right? Which is already a pretty severe condemnation of it. It makes my heart sink somehow, says Sam. Is that because the Ringwraiths are closing in? I don't think they're close enough to make Sam's heart sink exactly. Is it possible that Sam has some kind of premonition? That seems possible, right? Does Sam have somehow some kind of inkling or premonition of what's going to happen here, right? I mean, this night, his master is going to be wounded, and the wounding of his master this night is going to be a lifelong suffering for his master, right? One of the wounds that can never be fully healed in this world is going to happen to Frodo this evening. Are we being told? Is Sam revealing the fact that somehow and in some sense, knowledge of that is being given to him, right? That he's getting some kind of inclination? I don't know. I mean, that seems like it might be reading too much into that line. That, the mere proximity of the Black Riders, to which perhaps Sam is a little bit more sensitive than the others, is yeah, I mean, that might be a simpler explanation for it. It's just the way that he says it, right? It makes my heart sink somehow. We know we're going to see his heart sink when he looks at Frodo being wounded, right? And yet, Cecilia was saying, looking at from the text, the Dell doesn't seem that bad, right? Strider says he doesn't like it either. Yeah, exactly. There's no reason not to like it. Strider has just given reasons why it's better, right? Or he's just giving reasons why it's better, right? Yeah, they might know that we're here, but then again, there's nowhere that's better, that's safer than this, anywhere around, and we have a better chance of remaining hidden if we stay here than if we leave and go walking around. Yeah. Now, Bricktails, you're right that if enemies are nearby a hole, so it's called a hole because it's a dell, right? It's a steep-sided, grassy dell. So it's a tiny little valley, right, that they're in. It is true that it's hardly defensible, as you've already given up the high ground and could be surrounded easily. Yeah, that's true. So it's concealment, primarily, that their Strider is thinking of, right? That they're more likely to remain hidden here in this dell. That's at least seems to be his rationale, right? At least we are out of sight for the moment, he says. And if we moved, we should be much more likely to be seen by spies. I don't know who the spies are, right? Remember he suggested that even some birds might be acting as spies. Yeah. I am not convinced officially. So several of you are talking about the proximity of the Ringwraiths. I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that I'm not convinced that the proximity of the Nazgûl is yet affecting their spirits to this extent. And I say that because the proximity of the Ringwraiths seems to work. I mean, I don't know if it falls off as inverse distance squared or what, but it doesn't seem to work at really long range, right? Based on what we've seen anyway. I mean, they didn't feel this kind of oppression on their spirits in the prancing pony when the Nazgûl was out in the yard, right? So I tend not to think that it's the proximity of the Black Riders. I think that we will see, I know that we will see the Black Riders approaching as we move forward. I think we'll see evidence that they're closing in and getting closer, but I don't think they are yet. The three of them just came down the hill from the top of Weathertop, and when they saw them, they were far away, right? They're visible as little specks, not just because they're high up on the hilltop, but because they were far away. The Ringwraiths were far away down the road off towards Bree. Remember where it said they were located, right? The Ringwraiths, that is, where the Ringwraiths were located, was down on the out towards in the Breeward direction along the road. Anyway, yeah. Now I agree, Wolfreg. Sam's use of the word hole is entirely pejorative. It's not just descriptive in that they're in a little dell like a bowl. Sam doesn't seem to like holes, which is interesting for a hobbit, right? But I guess he must be referring to nasty, dirty holes filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, right? And who could blame him for not liking those? But yeah, that is an interesting but consistent piece of Sam diction, right? He will, Wolfreg, as you point out, call Moria a darksome hole. Absolutely. Okay, so I don't think the Ringwraiths are close enough yet to cause this. I think we'll see that, but I think that we will. I don't think that we're there yet. That's why I am inclined to think that, because I think we do get evidence of when the Nazgûl start to close in enough to actually start affecting the spirits of the hobbits while they're there inside the Dell, and I don't think we've gotten there yet. But that's, again, another reason why I'm inclined to think that Sam is being given some kind of insight about what's going to happen here. Okay. Let's see, what else was something else I was going to say about this? His suggestion about their movements. Again, what he's describing here is concealment. If they move, they're very likely to be seen, right, by spies. To go north, all they'd do is just retrace their steps the way they came down with those rocks screening them from Weathertop, right? They could go back up that path, but as they saw, right, there's no place that's safer than the spot that they're in. If they go south, they'd have to cross the road, and then they'd be very visible. And if they keep going off to the on the north side of the road beyond the hills, the country's bare and flat for miles, right? So again, they would show up. So concealment seems to be his primary reason for wanting to stay in the Dell. Okay. Somebody was asking whether the Ringwraiths can see. Nick was asking that. Glad you're asking that, Nick. Mary wants to know too. Can the riders see? Asked Mary. I mean, they usually have used their noses rather than their eyes, smelling for us, if smelling is the right word, at least in the daylight. But you made us lie down flat when you saw them down below, and now you talk of being seen if we move. I was too careless on the hilltop, answered Strider. I was very anxious for some sign of Gandalf, but it was a mistake for three of us to go up and stand there so long. For the black horses can see, and the riders can use men and other creatures as spies, as we found at Bree. They themselves do not see the world of light as we do, but our shapes cast shadows in their minds, which only the noon sun destroys. And in the dark they perceive many signs and forms that are hidden from us. Then they are most to be feared. And at all times they smell of the blood of living things, desiring it and hating it. Senses, too, there are other than sight or smell. We can feel their presence. It troubled our hearts as soon as we came here, and before we saw them. They feel ours more keenly. Also, he added, and his voice sank to a whisper, the ring draws them. Okay. Mary's question is based on their observations, right? And remember, Mary had not seen any Black Riders or made any observations himself, right? But he's the one who has had the most recent run-in with them there when he was saved by the heroic Nob. So they seem to have used their noses rather than their eyes. Excuse me, he says. So first let's look at his answer about the Nazgûl themselves, right? They themselves do not see the world of light as we do, but our shapes cast shadows in their minds, which only the noon sun destroys. Now, think about that for a second. What does that make you think of? Their forms, our shapes, their bodies, cast shadows in their minds, which only the noon sun destroys. Remind you of anything? Yes, Fourth Dauntless, exactly. Someone wearing the ring casts a shadow at noon. Remember, this happens with Bilbo, right? He's got to be careful about this because one of the things that can give him away in The Hobbit when he's wearing the ring is that the noonday sun will show up a shadow, right? It can be kind of thin and wobbly, but a shadow is visible. So when Bilbo is invisible because he's wearing the ring in The Hobbit, right? The noonday sun will cast a shadow from his body, which is not visible, right? Here in our world, here will see a shadow of him when he's wearing the ring. The Ringwraiths, when they are looking at our world, they don't see it, right? It's invisible to them in a sense, right? They're invisible, meaning they can't see it, right? Our regular world is invisible to them, except that our bodies cast shadows that they can see. Except in this case, the noon sun, rather than creating the shadow, abolishes it, right? So notice we have an almost exact reversal of those two things. Bilbo, while wearing the ring, right, and therefore sort of crossing over into the Wraith world, is not visible to our mortal eyes within the context of our mortal world, right? But there's a shadow. The sun makes a shadow. The Wraiths live full-time over in that world that the ring takes you into, right? They also make a shadow, right? They don't like the noon sun much, and they also make a shadow. You can see a shadow when you look at them, right? Their forms make shadows in our eyes too, just as ours make shadows in their eyes as well, right? They can see us, but they can see us in shadows, right? Because just as when we're looking at... So Bilbo's wearing the ring, we're looking at him, right? He's not fully in the same world that we're in, right? His body is in the Wraith world. That's why it's invisible, kind of, sort of. It's more complicated than that, but... yeah, Fourth Dauntless says, do we know that the Wraiths cast shadows rather than their clothes doing it? It's hard. I think so, because yeah, Sam talks about seeing vague shadowy shapes. I don't think it's just clothes. I don't think that they are totally invisible. I don't think they're in, like, if you saw them, they would look like just a cloak hanging there over absolutely nothing. There seems to be a shadow there. Allegreta's wondering if they can see themselves in the mirror. That's a great question. Probably. I would think they could see themselves. Yeah, Maelstrom is asking about why the noonday sun, right? Other than just the sort of obvious symbolism of it, right? When the day is brightest and fullest, then the darkness and the shadow is banished. Except when you're wearing the ring, it's created, right? It is, as Kate was saying earlier on, Kate Neville was saying, it's like a negative image, right? Of what happens on the other side, right? Yeah. Well, let's keep an eye out for that. Let's keep an eye out for more descriptions of the. Let's keep an eye out for more descriptions of the Ringwraiths to see if they're absolutely invisible or if they're shadowy at all. Yeah. Okay. So that's the sight question. In the dark, they perceive many signs and forms that are hidden from us. So again, that's what corresponds to the noon, right? They can see there are other things that are visible to them at night. And I don't think this just means they have excellent night vision, right? It's not just that. They see things, signs and forms that are hidden from us. Then they are most to be feared, right? Yes, I do think it means they have better night vision than we do, but it's not just about comparative night vision, I think. I think that they see more things, right? That there are things that are visible to them, things that are connected to the wraith world, perhaps in some sense, that we don't see, that we walk around, the world that we are surrounded by might look different, right? Yeah, perhaps they see dead people. That is quite possible. I don't know, but it's conceivable anyway. Yeah. Okay, so let's think. Phil, now is the word that I like so much. CSL's term for rational species. Now. HNAU. Very useful term. Okay. Yeah, for Thoughtless, we have no evidence that moonlight affects their perception at all. At least Strato doesn't mention it here. Belongs Bond, yes, the Nazgûl are not dead, in fact. But this is the end point of the stretching butter over too much bread process, presumably. Yeah. Matt, exactly. The transformation that we see in Glorfindel, right? When Frodo gets a glimpse of what he looks like on the other side, suggests that if you could see the other side all the time, you would see many, signs and forms that are hidden from us, right? Absolutely. They see those things especially clearly at night. Now, you might ask, so what about when you're wearing the ring, right? Of course, we know famously, and I've never been a big fan of the ring vision world that Frodo is surrounded by when he puts on the ring in the Fellowship, in the Peter Jackson movies. The thing I always disliked about that was that based on the text, like Bilbo would have had to live that way for weeks at a time. I mean, he lived invisibly in the halls of the Elven King for weeks. And the idea that the entire time Bilbo was going around with like the creepy, I see you, and everything else, right? While Sauron was just a few hundred miles south, right, in Mirkwood. It's just, that's obviously not what Tolkien is describing, right? And yet, it's not that there's no grounding for that, right? In other words, what I would say is it's clear that that's not the experience of putting on the ring. Neither Bilbo nor Frodo records any kind of strangeness or distortion to their vision up to this point. That's never happened before, right? When they put on the ring. But in a sense, it's interesting that they don't. Peter Jackson's depiction does not match the depiction in the text. But why not? Why don't Bilbo and Frodo suddenly see the Wraith world exposed in front of them, right? And the answer seems to be, yeah, now Dr. Evil Canon, we do get a mention of distortion from Sam. That's later, much later, and right on the borders of Mordor, right? Lots of things change. Proximity, right? Inverse distance squared. Like I say, it's a different world on the borders of Mordor than it is out here. The interesting thing is that Frodo and Bilbo see the world normally, right? They are looking at our regular world. They just are not apparent to our regular world. Their connection to our regular world seems to be different. The extent to which Frodo, at least in the films, is kind of incorporated much more fully into the Wraith world is interesting, and it works dramatically in the film. But I think it's important that it isn't like that in the book, actually, right? He's not taken in like a native to the Wraith world. He doesn't find himself in a new world, in a new place when he puts on the ring. He could. That concept is there. Strider is suggesting that, right? The Wraiths are in that place. But that seems to me the crucial thing, right? It's not putting on the ring that makes you a native of the Wraith world, that makes you see the Wraith world around you all the time. It is the Wraithification process, right? As they get more and more corrupted, Bilbo and Frodo, right? As they themselves move closer to a Wraith-like existence themselves. That would seem to be when they would be entering more and more until they were like Wraiths themselves and permanently there. So the ring affects their bodies. The ring, makes them invisible because their bodies, their forms have been sort of taken over into the Wraith world, but they don't just see it all the time, right? Yeah. So let's watch how this goes, because several of you are asking about Frodo's vision of the Ringwraiths. I know, right? That's exactly what I'm thinking about, and that's exactly why this is so interesting. So let's see what happens when we get there. But, you're skipping ahead, right? That's not for like 2 more weeks at least. We'll get there. Okay, so let's keep going. There are other senses as well. Okay. At all times, they smell the blood of living things, desiring and hating it. So the smelling thing, right? The sniffing, sniffing creatures with invisible noses. What they are sniffing is the blood of living things. They desire and hate the blood of living things. And there are other senses too. We can feel their presence. It troubled our hearts as soon as we came here and before we saw them. They feel ours more keenly. Also, he added, the ring draws them. All right, let's come back to that in a second. The smelling and the senses other than sight or smell. I don't think, by the way, when it says they smell blood, this is not like a shark or something, right? I don't think you have to spill blood, and I don't think they would hone in on drops of blood on the ground or something like that. I think it's not about that, right? They seem to smell, to desire, and to hate the blood of living creatures while it is still inside the body of the living creature in question, right? Again, it doesn't mean that they will track you down twice as fast if you have an open wound, I don't think. But it's just about your being a living person, right? The blood is the life was true in Dracula, and I suspect in that sense it's true here. What Strider is referring to when he talks about them smelling the blood of living things, desiring and hating it. And I think what they're desiring is not. I don't think they drink the blood of humans. I don't think they desire the blood of living things in that way, right? They like blood. They just don't like blood like that, right? At least I don't see any reason to believe. I see no support, no evidence to support the idea that they actually drink the blood of living creatures. You could take it that way, right? I mean, it's possible. I could imagine people taking it that way, but I don't believe that at all, right? They desire and hate the blood of living creatures, because they themselves are not living, right? They are envious of the blood of living creatures, right? They can smell it. They can smell the life. They can smell the warm life of a living creature. They can't see it, right? But they can smell it, right? They can smell, but I think it's the livingness. It's the life that they smell. I suspect if there were like if somebody were killed, right? If somebody were lying cold and dead and their body's been lying there for hours, right? And all the, blood is everywhere. I don't think that, I think the ringwraiths would probably smell that less rather than more because they're not alive anymore, right? I think it's the life that they're smelling, not, again, physically the blood. And yeah, they do hate everything, even their master Blancsmond. Yeah, absolutely. Do they, hate and love themselves like Gollum hated and loved himself in the rings? That's probably still there, right? We don't really get that much about ringwraith psychology. We don't know for sure. They do seem to be loyal servants, right? We don't see them grudging against Sauron, and yet even this one little glimpse of desiring and hating the blood of living creatures suggests that kind of conflict, that kind of simultaneous desire and hatred is certainly in them. Exactly. They want blood. They don't need it, Ethelwad. I agree. They want it. They want it in the sense of like they want to have it themselves, right? Life was what they were about. Life is how they got into this predicament. The desire to have and to keep life. They don't want blood to drink. They want blood to circulate, right? They are longing with envy after the life of other living creatures. Yeah, no, exactly, Kate. Yeah, the sort of the biblical, both Old and New Testament connections between blood and life is one of the things that I'm thinking of here. I was being a little bit flippant in bringing up Dracula, but of course I think it's relevant, and for the same reason, right? That's why Dracula drinks blood, after all, right? It's not just because it's an excellent protein source, but because he's about consuming the life of living creatures. Okay, so one more thing, Ali, I'll come back to your question because it's a great question. It was asked earlier on as well, and we'll come back to that in a second, but the ring draws them. Okay. No, I got nothing. Well, we observe that Strider says that, but let's leave that for now because we'll get in as much as there will be more, we'll get more later on. Sorry, just dropped something out of my pocket. But we don't have it yet, so let's not go there yet. But we'll hang on to that. So I'll go instead to Ali's question. How does Strider know all this? Right? Where is Strider? What is the source of Strider's lore on the Ringwraiths? I think he has to. I mean, there are a few obvious candidates, right? I would say two things. We know he's been taught stuff. I mean, presumably you'd think he would have availed himself of the available, resources at Rivendell, right? Especially, as he decides he's going to make a career of opposing the shadow, right? He's going to go pro in the whole fighting evil business, which we know he decides fairly early in his life. There's a lot of people with a lot of experience here. I think he would have, asked about these things. And then in addition, of course, there's his own personal experience, right? He has probably had more direct experience with the Ringwraiths than most of the lore masters that he could speak to in Rivendell, right? So the combination of those two things. I mean, remember his PTSD reaction when he was talking about the Ringwraiths, right? He's interacted with them. He has learned of them from interacting with them in large part. Sorry, here we go. yeah. So his own experience combined with what he's learned, every reason to think Halstein that he took Ringwraith 101 in Rivendell, right? And then I would think it was probably like a 200 level class, right? Like he probably took Defense of the Dark Arts against the Dark Arts 101, right? Just sort of a general, like the ways of the shadow introductory, lecture course, and then like an advanced seminar in, the fighting the shadow major at Rivendell, right? Would have had like the sophomore level classes would be like advanced seminar on the Ulyri, right? And then he would have gone on for some practical tutorials further down the road. So that all, I think there's lots of opportunity for him to have gotten both kinds of knowledge about the Ringwraiths. Kate, absolutely. I do think that Glorfindel would have been the one to teach the advanced seminar on the Ulyri. Absolutely, yeah. Agreed. Okay. Was there something else? I think there's a lot I wanted to talk about on this page. This is a big page, right? This paragraph is huge for Ringwraith lore. We learn as much about Ringwraiths and how they operate in this paragraph as we do almost anywhere else. I mean, if we had to have to narrow down, like if we had to put together all of the concrete information we're given about Ringwraiths, this is one of the big places, right? So, yeah. So let's see. The spies, right? We do need to talk about the spies. So the black horses can see. Okay. The black horses can see. I'm not sure what that suggests. I mean, does it suggest some kind of like empathic connection between the Ringwraiths and their horses? Right? What Forthal was just saying, that is, do the black horses also talk? Right? Presumably they don't talk, but that's exactly a good question. Right? So what if the horses can see? Right? I mean, how is that going to get back to the Ringwraiths? I don't know exactly what that's supposed to mean. Does it just mean that they are very perceptive to the horses and notice when the horses react to something? I don't really know. I mean, it's hard to imagine these horses being utterly complicit, and in fact, like collaborators with the shadow. It's hard to believe. Maybe they've been thoroughly corrupted to that extent. But I'm not really sure. Not-a-Cat does point out that there does seem to be, however, some form of communication with beasts, whether it's their horses or not, because, of course, both men and other creatures are used as spies. And we've already had the mention of birds as well. So, yeah. No, I mean, there does seem to be some mechanism by which the non-human spies can communicate with the Nazgûl that might possibly mean that the Nazgûl can communicate with their horses or understand what their horses see or something. Yeah. Aslan's Compass, I agree. Aslan's Compass says, on the simplest level, it means the horses of the Ringwraiths don't run into trees, right? The black horses can see. Yeah, so it's not like, everything there is blind, like you don't have to worry about anything. They don't run into trees. Agreed. But there does seem to be some sort of kind of communication. Yeah. See, Ali, that's exactly the direction that I was thinking of, right? We do learn later that the horses, we don't learn. It is suggested that the horses that they use are Rohirric horses, right? The orcs come and always steal the black horses, and these are, of course, black horses that we see them riding. This seems likely to be the fate of all of those stolen black horses that the Rohirrim lament. So Ali asks then the sensible follow-up question, is it possible that the horses of Rohan are corrupted? Similarly to, in some sense, maybe some shadow of like the corruption of elves into orcs. Well, that's what I was wondering too. I mean, you think about the connection that the riders of Rohan seem to have with their horses, right? They can't exactly speak to them. And yet you've got to think that if Eomer's horse sees an enemy off in the distance, Eomer's going to know about it, right? Somehow he's going to figure that out, right? There does seem to be some kinds of sort of nonverbal communication, right, between horse and rider in Rohan. Does that suggest that the riders have corrupted the spirits of the horses, that the horses have become, as they say, active collaborators? I don't think we need to think about an actual elf to orc conversion going on here, right? Like the horses that they ride on are not truly horses anymore, but have been twisted into something entirely different. I don't think we need go that far. It could just be that their will was broken and that they now serve their new masters as well as they would have served their good masters had they remained in Rohan. Now, Ganetta points out that if Gandalf and Radagast can communicate with beasts, then why not the Ringwraiths? I would add, and why not in particular the Witch King, right? That the others, I don't think all of them need necessarily be able to communicate with birds and beasts, but I see no reason why the Witch King shouldn't. It does seem to be kind of a wizardly thing, really, right? And it's honestly, it seems to be in their kind of job description as wizards rather than as part of their makeup as Maiar that they speak to birds and beasts. Certainly, I would say the ability to speak to birds and beasts does seem to predate the whole Maiar thing for Gandalf. Remember the song. Well, I say remember, we haven't gotten there yet, but do you remember the song that Frodo, the lament that Frodo sings about Gandalf after he falls in Moria? Right? Oops, sorry, spoilers. Right, with bird on bough and beast in den, in their own secret tongues he spoke, he says, of Gandalf. Yeah, he can speak the languages of birds and beasts. I would be very willing to bet that the Witch King can also speak the languages of birds and beasts. So that seems possible. Bricktails, that's very true, and I agree that the way in which the Ringwraiths themselves tend to act more bestial, right? The crawling on all fours and sniffing the ground. Makes it seem kind of more believable that there's some kind of communion with beasts there. Yeah. But sure. Yeah. The Witch King. Yeah. He is, was the Witch King a wizard sorcerer? Oh yeah, absolutely. He was very sorcerous. Yep. Certainly. Yeah, cool. Okay. Yeah, Ethelwad is wondering about the corruption of the wills of others. Are they going to remain dominated? See, I'm not sure about dominated. Remember, like Bill Ferny, right? Bill Ferny's not dominated, right? He's just a bad egg, right? Harry doesn't seem to be dominated. He's just intimidated. Seems to be, I would say that, Harry Goatleaf, right, is no reason to think that he was a wicked guy all the way through, right? But he's been intimidated. His will has been cowed, by which I don't mean like he has become dominated and is now like a zombie, right? It doesn't mean that. Right? It just means that he's now working for them. He's afraid. He's afraid of the Ringwraiths, and he doesn't want to oppose them. So he has made the choice to do what they want him to do. Bill Ferny didn't take all that much convincing, right? He's also doing what he wants, what they want him to do. But again, not because he's been dominated, but because he's a jerk, right? And a scoundrel, and because he thinks there's profit in it for him. They offered him a bribe and he took it, right? So it was his choice. But it's still his will is serving them, right? Were the horses like that, right? I don't know. would the Brelanders go back to be, like, is there any hope for Harry Goatleaf? Could Harry Goatleaf reform and become a constructive member of the Breland Society later on if he had, if he were to be pardoned for his participation in the brigandage? Possibly. I mean, yeah, it's possible. I think he has every bit as much of a chance of, seeing the error of his ways and repenting as anybody else. Right. Yeah. Kate, that is, oh yeah, probably. Yeah. Yeah. Kate says she just realized that the fox was probably planted in the Shire by Radagast on behalf of Gandalf, part of the whole guard set on the Shire. Yeah, the thinking fox. Yeah, absolutely. That's got to be it, right? Absolutely, makes perfect sense. That conclusion seems almost inescapable. Actually, the more you think about it, especially since we saw foxes again later on, right? There's clearly a general fox network, right? The Fox News Network, as it were, right, sending news to Radagast and Gandalf. Absolutely, totally. Okay. Let's keep going. Keep going. I say, is there another thing I wanted to talk about here? Yeah, no, I'm good. The ring draws them. Okay, one more. Is there no escape, then? Said Frodo, looking round wildly. If I move, I shall be seen and hunted. If I stay, I shall draw them to me. Strider laid his hand on his shoulder. There is still hope, he said. You are not alone. Let us take this wood that is set ready for the fire as a sign. There is little shelter or defense here, but fire shall serve for both. Sauron can put fire to his evil uses, as he can all things. But these riders do not love it, and fear those who wield it. Fire is our friend in the wilderness. Maybe, muttered Sam. It's also as good a way of saying, here we are, as I can think of, bar shouting. Okay. I love this passage, right? There are a bunch of points in the book that become really cool once you learn that Aragorn's name was Hope, right? For most of his childhood, like he grew up being called Hope by everybody around him. Estelle was his name, which means hope. So this is one of those. This is one of those things. Oh, Matt, I knew there was something else. No, you're right, Matt. Hang on a second. Wait, pause on the Estelle thing. Matt pointed out that I knew there was another thing I meant to talk about, and that is Strider's comment that we can feel their presence. It troubled our hearts as soon as we came here, which would seem to explain Sam's premonition. I still think the wording of Sam's premonition is conspicuous. It might just be accidental foreshadowing, but another question I have about this. Is whether or not Strider is suggesting that they feel their presence in this, like that their immediate proximity, or they sense that they were here. Like what they're feeling is the fact that the Ringwraiths were just here recently, right? It troubled our hearts as soon as we came here, right? By that, I take Strider to mean like, so this spot is still full of the presence of the Ringwraiths, right? We can sense it when we come here. I don't think it's like when they were just outside the Dell or when they were just down the road from the Dell, like now they're super far from the Ringwraiths and can't feel them, right? Like, I don't think this is like playing the hot and cold game. Like they're, coming into the Dell and they're like, well, hotter as they're getting physically closer to the Ringwraiths. I can't imagine that half a mile up the road, they are more appreciably far away from the Ringwraiths as they are here, such that now they can sense them and before they couldn't. So again, I don't think Strider is referring to their current proximity to the Ringwraiths. I think he is talking about the fact that the presence of the Ringwraiths has left a kind of mark on this spot. And that's why he says, it troubled our hearts as soon as we came here and before we saw them, right? After we saw them, we might be worrying about them, right? And so our hearts are troubled, right? Our hearts are troubled because we saw the Ringwraiths out on the road, but our hearts were troubled before that, right? Even before we saw them on the road, our hearts were troubled as soon as we came here. So, yeah. Fourth Thoughtless wonders if the Dell was where the Nazgûl gathered before assaulting Gandalf. Yeah, though presumably his the remnant of his camp there is. I mean, he was probably the one who lit the fire there recently, and the signs of a hasty camp were probably his, right? Gandalf's, that is. So if I am understanding it properly, how I would reconstruct events would be something like this. Gandalf is camping in the Dell under Weathertop, right? He senses the Black Riders getting close to him, right? Closing in on him. He flees, and he flees up the hill because he knows he's not going to go herring off into, it's night, right? He's not going to go herring off into the forest in the middle of the night running from the Ringwraiths. It's not what you do, right? They're going to be stronger there, right? So they're going to, so he's going to go up the hill, right? Where he can defend himself on the hilltop. And they follow him up the hilltop. They have their scorching fight up on the hilltop. Gandalf withdraws, right? And they pursue him. He probably comes scrambling down. Maybe that is when the rocks fell down on the far side of the Dell. Jumps on his horse and takes off. Bricktail says, so they just left Gandalf's horse sitting there? Yeah, sure. Why not? Why not? I mean, his horse there is Shadowfax, right? I would think Shadowfax could belongs beyond. You're right. If Shadowfax wouldn't have to be tied up, right? He could have taken off and come back. I also would not find it hard to believe that they would just leave the horse. What do they want with the horse? Again, it's not like they eat things, right? It's not like they would eat the horse or suck the horse's blood or something like that. They're not going to care about the horse, right? But they could have tracked Gandalf to this spot. They would have detected that Gandalf went up the hill. He's the one they want. They don't care about the horse. So they would chase him up the hill. I mean, even if it is Shadowfax, right? I don't think they probably would care really. I mean, you're right that killing the horse would make it harder for Gandalf to flee, like the scattering of the ponies in Bree Fourth Dauntless. But remember, that seems to be Bill Ferny's plan, not the Ringwraiths. Right? That doesn't seem to be how the Ringwraiths think. So yeah, I still don't think that that's what I mean, I'm not saying that the Witch King's dumb, because he's not dumb. But also, again, like, why should they bother with the horse? What's he going to do? Send a couple of the Ringwraiths to chase down Shadowfax? How are they going to catch him? Right? Because, of course, I said Gandalf tied up his horse. I was not even thinking about, of course, that this is Shadowfax, right? Gandalf is going to tie up Shadowfax. So, what are they going to do to Shadowfax, right? How are they going to do anything to Shadowfax? They're not going to be able to catch Shadowfax, nor are any other horses going to be able to catch Shadowfax. So if they went for Shadowfax, he'd run and get away, no questions. So I don't think Shadowfax is in much danger, nor do I think that Gandalf would be worried that Shadowfax would be in much danger. So, yeah. Okay. Anyway, good. Anyhow, so, oh shoot, sorry, my Twitter feed just seems to have been messed up. Oh well. Okay. My apologies there. Never mind. I'll keep going. I'm almost done with the main part anyway. Let's go back to over here. Okay, back to Hope. Yeah, getting distracted talking about Shadowfax. Frodo says, is there no escape then? If I move, I shall be seen and hunted. If I stay, I shall draw them to me. So, yes. Short answer, Frodo, yes. That's exactly kind of, there is no escape here. notice how Strider has been tactfully not explaining this, right, in this kind of detail to him before, right? Because Frodo's reaction seems to be more or less exactly what Strider has been trying to avoid, namely despair. If Frodo is overcome with terror and despair, it makes the Nazgûl stronger, right? Remember Strider, or Frodo rather, saying to Gildor, I don't know what could be more terrifying than your hints and warnings, right? Knowing the certain truth of what is facing you, right? And what like this moment, if I move, I shall be seen and hunted. If I stay, I shall draw them to me. It's a good thing that Frodo didn't have this particular moment, right, until he had Estelle with him, right, until he had Hope right there, who could lay his hand on his shoulder and say, there is still hope. You are not alone, right? He wasn't alone before, but he wouldn't have been... He wasn't not alone in the same way that he's not alone here. And speaking of being not alone in a particular way, look at his segue. Follow Aragorn's train of thought here. Frodo is in despair, right? Terror and despair. And Strider says, there is still hope. You are not alone. Let us take this wood that is set for the fire as a sign. There is little shelter or defense here, but fire shall serve for both. Fire is our friend in the wilderness. So I would say there are three things that we can see Aragorn saying to Frodo here, right? 1, fire is our friend. You're not alone. Fire is our friend in the wilderness, right? So reason number 1 to cheer up Frodo and not to despair is we have resources, right? This may seem helpless, right? You may seem helpless. And this may seem absolutely hopeless. Well, how can we possibly resist them? How can we keep from being destroyed? We're all going to die. We're all going to die, right? So his first thing is, no, we're not necessarily all going to die, right? They hate fire. We have fire. We have all of this firewood that has been left for us, right? So let's make a fire. With that, we have a chance of fighting off the enemy. And Matt, that's a really great point. The swords from the barrows will appear as firebrands when seen from the Wraith world, says Matt. So that is a really interesting point. Okay, so his rebuttal to Frodo's despair, the first part is, we have resources. Fire is our friend. The second thing, you are not alone. You have comrades, right? We are all here. Fire is not just your friend. Fire is our friend. We are all in this together. You are not alone. You have us to help to defend you. And together, we might be able to fight them off, right? Third, you are not alone. Let us take this wood that is set ready for the fire as a sign. And Blancsmond, I absolutely hear that as a reference to Providence as well, right? This is the first time Strider has delivered this line. Let us take this, whatever it is, as a sign, right? He's not even going... He's not even not a cat. He's not even speaking with the if chance you call it kind of evasive language, right? He's being much more open than that, right? By Gildor, by him saying that it was but a chance meeting, if chance you call it, right? Is acknowledging the fact that there is more to chance than most people say. Like, he's acknowledging you would call it chance, right? Your people tend to use that kind of word. They talk about luck and they talk about chance. The fact that I'm observing that some people call it chance, but I seem not to, right, suggests that I know something about it that you don't, right? Strider is much more clear than that. let us take this as a sign, right? You are not alone. Someone is looking out for us and has brought us to a place where the resource that we need that would most help us to defend ourselves against the enemy happens to be here ready for us, right? Let us embrace that chance. Let us embrace that providence, right? So his comforting speech is pretty comforting, actually, right? That you are not alone, as I said, works in those three different ways. But of course, it's Sam who gets the last line, right? Maybe it's also as good a way of saying, here we are as I can think of, bar shouting. Originally, Strider was emphasizing, we'll be best concealed here, right? This Dell is safest. His first answer back a few paragraphs ago, right, was, I can't think of anywhere where we would be safer than here. This is the best spot that we have found yet. And if we move, we're more likely to be seen. And now he's talking about building a big fire, right? And Sam is like, well, so much for not being seen. It's as good a way as saying, here we are as I can think of. So Sam sort of grumbles about this. But what Sam is observing, I think that this is a moment, in this moment, when Strider says, let us take this wood that is set ready for the fire as a sign, I believe that Strider has made a decision, right? Because this does, in fact, Sam is right. And this does, in fact, contradict his approach before. Before, he had been thinking, let's try to hide. Let's stay in this dell and hope they don't see us or know where we are, because we have the best chance of remaining hidden here. That was the rationale that he was explaining before. Now, he doesn't care, it seems, about remaining hidden. He seems to realize, maybe having talked through it himself, that they're going to be found, right? They can be smelled. The ring draws them, even if they're not seen by spies. The enemy's going to sense their presence, right? And hone in on them. So let's fight. Let us prepare to fight against the enemy when it comes. And Kate, I agree. He does step out of his reticence and hedging, Strider does. He's being definitive. And that is a mode of hope itself. And notice, Kate, I would also add to that, he's being inclusively definitive, right? He's not just saying, we shall take this, or I shall take this wood as a sign, right? That's not what he says. Let us take this wood for a sign. You and me, Frodo. We'll do that together. Let us both interpret it this way. Let us both join in this decision. It's a very inclusive. It's confident, right? But it's very inclusive as well. Let us take this as a sign. I'm going to take it this way, Frodo, and so should you, right? Because you should have hope, because you are not alone. This really is, Kate, I agree. This is a big Fellowship moment. Fellowship has already been an important motif in this book. We saw that from, Gandalf's saying that he shouldn't go alone, to the conspiracy unmasked, and, what we saw in, as they went in Three's company, his conversation with Gildor, even the behavior of the ponies on the Barrow Downs and Tom Bombadil's comments on that, right? The common room of the inn at Bree, Strider helping them in the night in Bree, Nobb's rescue. Many times we have seen already the importance of Fellowship, right? Bricktails, there's of course the title of the book, but I don't take that as evidence. In a sense, that is, the title was so late and grudging that all the stuff in the text predates it. Anyway, so yeah, but back to Sam's last comment. Sam is still concerned, right? It is to Sam to observe that all of this hopeful talk might be good, right? But he is the one who makes explicit to us the consequences of Aragorn's decision, right? The consequence of Aragorn's decision is they're not going to hide. I mean, he is drawing our attention to the fact that this choice to build a fire, and by building a fire to sort of fort up, that choice is a choice to abandon stealth. They are going to draw the attention of the enemy, to give up any. So in this embracing of hope, they are giving up the chance of stealth, right? They are abandoning stealth. And Sam is conscious of that and is pointing that out, right? Can we see this as, Ali, exactly what I was just going to say, Sam doubting Strider? I'm not sure about doubt, but being willing to point out the shortfalls of the plan, right? Strider's plan is very hopeful, but it has a downside. And Sam is the one who is going to not only notice the downside and draw our attention to the downside, he is going to give voice to it, right? It doesn't speak to Strider's face about it, right? We don't get a Mr. Strider statement here, but he is going to voice under his breath his very common sense reaction, pointing out that this plan is not without risk, right? Kate says common sense can be depressing sometimes. So true. So true. I'm so glad I so rarely have to deal with that. Cool. Yes. Fourth Dauntless clarifies Sam is doubting Strider's decision, but not necessarily mistrusting him. Yes. I don't see mistrust in this either, right? I just see Sam saying, well, this might turn out really badly, right? That's essentially that would seem to be the one of the ways to kind of paraphrase Sam's comment here. All right, we're going to stop there. We're well over time, and I still want to do the field trip. I know it doesn't feel quite as much like overtime because it's not midnight, but nevertheless, although it is not. The very witching hour that is calling to my attention the fact that it's getting to be late, the fact that my children are going to want to eat before too long is reminding me. So I still have to go feed my family at some point. So we're going to stop this now tonight. Well, we're going to stop our text portion of the class, and we are going to do our field trip. So thanks to everybody who is joining us just for this. I already, unfortunately, had my Twitter stream interrupted, so I've already forcibly said goodbye to my Twitter people. So thanks to all of you who are not going to continue with us. If you are, come and join us here either in Discord or the Twitch chat. As we are here on the Brandywine server, and we are going to continue here. So, and Ali, I think you got your microphone on.
Hello. Yes, I finally did. Thanks to Trish.
Yes, I saw Trish. A wild Trish showed up, and a wild Trish appeared, and
oh yeah. Out of nowhere.
Yeah, she came out like a knight errant, King Pelennor passing through, and she opened up your mic. So that's awesome.
So Corey did say that we are going to be riding. So I did want to summon people who were unable to ride there, but I think if we are all riding, we should be fine and can protect people even if they are lower level. So there won't be any problem.
Yeah. As long as people, if anybody doesn't have a horse or doesn't have access to a horse, you could come up to the stage now, and we'll transport people. So yeah, if there are non-riders, walkers will take longer, or runners.
Yes,
will take longer.
I'll summon whoever needs a summon once we reach the destination. They can send me a tell, and I can summon them where we need to be.
Okay. Good. But before we take off, Ali, you had said that you had you didn't get to do the introduction at the beginning, which I was hoping to allow you to do, to introduce yourself and your kinship as well, which is sort of hosting us here today on Brandywine. And I think you said you had a poem that you wanted to read.
I did have a few verses from a poem, because I think it's like a tradition that
That's right.
every time we do host the Tolkien Professors sessions here, I do say some words in rhymes, just because I do love poetry, and I know Tolkien loved poetry as well. Obviously not as good a poet as Tolkien was, being a master of the language and everything. But I do try. And yeah, so I wrote last time, I did like a little tribute to the troll song. And this time, since we were on the topic of reading the Road Goes Ever On and On poem, and I did mention to Corey before that he did 4 versions together and he read them all, which was pretty cool. So in the same essence of the poem, mine goes like this. The lore goes ever on and on, right when the Hobbit podcast began. See how far the road has gone, and we must follow it if we can. Pursuing it with passion, with eager minds, striving for knowledge to find our way. The details and amazing ways he finds, where the next adventure leads, I cannot say. So welcome to another session of lore. I know this part was supposed to be at the start.
At the beginning, yes.
So, well, thank you for staying for another session of lore, where casual raiders once again host a journey of discovery, discussion, a journey to explore. A scholar by our side, better than the rest, better than most. So let us all thank you, Corey. Our session must start as we venture deeper into the story. Now let us depart. Again, it was supposed to be at the end,
at the beginning,
intro, but now let us depart indeed on our field trip.
Exactly, right. Very good. Thank you. My only hope is that the eagerness doesn't change to weariness before the end, of course, as we so we don't shift from the Bilbo version to the Frodo version before we get to the end of the book.
Like at least 3 years away from that ever happening. At the pace that we are going, I think we'll be fine for the next 2 years at least.
That's good. Yeah, because it might take us a year to get through the Council of Elrond. But yeah, as I think, we are likely to take every bit of 15 sessions to get through chapter 11. And it's not like chapter 11 is the longest chapter in the whole book. It's all good, though. As I've said before, I don't apologize because I'm never going to get a chance to do this again. This will be the most in-depth discussion of the Lord of the Rings of my whole life. So I'm going to take advantage of it. So, all right. Let's take off. So, okay. So if you need a ride, you can come up here and Ali will transport you. I think we're going to go, what time of day is it? It is morning. Sweet. Let's go up to Weathertop then. So let's meet on top of Weathertop. And because last time we were up there looking at the view, but it was nighttime. So we couldn't see that much. I wanted to see it during the day. So let's go up to the top of Weathertop. We'll start there and then we will explore outwards from there. What I want to do, sort of start anyway today, and we'll continue this as we go through, is to be doing a little bit more Lone Lands exploration. So we did some, I'm thinking especially of what we were doing in the, I guess we should go this way, right? It's faster. Yeah, let's go this way. Looking at the Lone Lands from a sort of archaeological and historical point of view, looking at what we see in the Lone Lands as far as the geography and the ruins. We've already discussed, I think, pretty much every part of the Lone Lands which is in the book. There's not too many of them. We get the reference, of course, to the Forsaken Inn, and we get, I'm lagging here. And we get some, so we get the reference to the Forsaken Inn, and of course we get Weathertop and the approach to Weathertop that we were already looking at. We saw the Dell where they were, hiding, and where Frodo's going to be attacked. Okay, so I'm just going to pause here for a second. All right, we're all heading out here. Okay, all right, no problem. We'll head on towards Rivendell here. So yeah, like with Rivendell, we're almost done with all of this. But of course, we'll get the last bridge. That will be really sort of the next thing that will, I think, that I can think of anyway, that maps really closely onto what we see in the game. The parts from the book that map onto the game. But of course, there's much more than that, right? And this is where we get the really, the really smart and detail-oriented kind of adaptation that Lotro is so famous for. So in the North Downs, we were looking at it primarily from an Arnorian context, right? Because the North Downs was a major part, a really important part of the old lost kingdom of Arnor. Because it was where Fornost was, and so it was the capital of Arthedain, and we were looking at places where we could see evidence of the dividing lines post-Arnorian civil war between Arthedain and Rhudaur, especially. Over here in the Breelands, we were looking at where the Cartilangian ruins, of which we decided must be the adjectival form, up in the Barrow Downs. And sort of where we could see the lines. I love how you can look at the land around here and not only see the direct connections to the book, which have so rarely disappointed me in the game, when there are details that are specifically mentioned in the book, and I go looking for them in the game, I can usually find them, and that's always been delightful. But it's not just that, right? It's also the bigger picture. It's also the whole history of this area as we have it described for us, especially in the appendices, especially in Appendix A of The Return of the King. So I'm waiting here until I cross the border. Then when I cross the border, I won't pause. I'll head straight to Weathertop while the weather's good. With my luck, if I stood and lectured on the other side of the boundary, it'd be raining by the time I got up to Weathertop. So
it is a perfect day for the vision and seeing everything.
Yeah. So let's go do some sightseeing while the sightseeing is good.
How close is the design that they made in Lotro to the descriptions in the book?
They are very good generally at capturing the sort of character of it, right? So that's what I really like about the Lone Lands. All the way in which we're, right now as we're transitioning from the lush green of the Breelands to the browns. It just looks less fertile and less, but that's very like the description, especially of the land that they, as in the book, just as we were looking at a few weeks ago. Ooh, sorry, I can never pass a stable master without introducing myself.
What do you need?
You have to, always.
Yeah, exactly.
They're so nice and welcoming.
They are so nice. And you never know when it might be good to have met them. Anyway, we were looking at it a few weeks ago, in the text, I mean, the passage where they're climbing up out of the Midgewater marshes, and the land as it's described with the sort of blasted trees and, everything, it looks more stunted, not actively desolate, like the desolation of Smaug or something like that. But, it's not that. So when I say that they do a really good job of sort of carrying over things from the book, it isn't that you can always necessarily find the exact locations that are described in the book. The scale makes that really challenging. The differences in scale between the world in the book and the world in the game. But at the same time, I think what they do, the two things that they do best, in my opinion, in Lotro, with their overall kind of capturing of the descriptions from the game, the two things that they do best, I think, are first individual details, like when they're going to do a particular location that is described, they usually take those details that are mentioned very seriously. So that's one thing they're really good at. Is this the way? No, wait. We need to go down to the Dell, right?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. I was just interested to look because this is the waterfall that goes down into the Dell. Interesting, that right? And there's the wood. We can see it straight below us. One thing I wanted to look for. Okay, this is just the wood down here.
It should be this way.
Yeah.
The top.
This is where the footprints would have been. Right, this is the camp.
Oh, somebody. Let's kill this guy.
We're being attacked here by orcs, right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this is that other path up, right? I think this is the path we went up last week. It's faster than the road.
Guess you can pretty much get to the top by going this way.
Yeah. That's right. Oh yeah, this is the way that always looks like you shouldn't be able to go, but you can.
Exactly.
Yeah. There we go. Okay. All right. So here we are now. Let's see. Which direction should we look first? First, let's look to the west. So looking down.
These birds must be the spies that.
Yes, these are exactly the spies
mentioned.
that Aragorn was worried about. Yes, and that of course is why. See, that's another example of them picking up on a detail, right? Aragorn mentioned birds specifically in an earlier passage, and he talked about spies seeing them if they move, and so they put Crebain as spies up here on the hilltop for you to find them in the game. But I don't think I finished before I described this. I don't think I finished my description before. That is, I said there were two ways in which I think Lotro captures the text really well in their landscape descriptions. One are specific details, as I say, of a particular scene. But even more than that is just the overall sort of quality. They're really good at capturing, when Tolkien does those big landscape descriptions, right, and kind of gives you the broad picture of what this land looks like, I think they do a really good job of capturing that. They can't capture every hill and stream and tree that is described in the book, because the scale is different. You just can't do that. One hill in the game represents, 10 miles of country or something in the book. So they can't make all the contours of the land look exactly the same. And there are always going to be new things that weren't there, like that ravine that we were looking at up north of Weathertop when we were trying to find the way down. However, at the same time, they are really good at capturing the overall spirit. So I think the Lone Lands are perfect. I mean, it was just one of many places in the game that I remember the first time I went there and was looking around, and I was just like, this is exactly right. This is exactly perfect. Remember Strider just talking about how off to the west is open land, right? With no cover, and you can see, there's there's a few trees, but there's not much cover here. That's the road that we can see. We can see the road there winding in between. What do we see
That's
from
the
here?
straight road that goes from pretty much from the Shire or even from the Blue Mountains straight to
Yes.
Rivendell.
Yes, exactly. Well, let me dismount. I'm still on my horse. If I dismount, can I get through there to Floyd and DeWitt, or do I have to go around? I think I have to go around, don't I?
Let's see.
I think I might have
Yeah,
to go
I think
around.
so.
All right, hang on. And go around this
Oh, there we go.
bit of wall here. Okay, yeah.
A new deed.
Yes,
Look at
there we
that.
go. The Adventures of Floyd and DeWitt. Okay. So looking out from here, yeah, this is a better view. Looking out from here, we see the road winding through. We can see, well, towards the last bridge. Can actually see the bridge clearly from here. But we can see those hills up there, like the large hill that we can see off in the distance to the pretty much dead to the west. Those are the hills in which Rivendell is. So we can see quite a long ways here. And what we can notice through here, look at these ruins. Again, ruins described in the book, but wow, there's a lot of ruins. Let's come back and let's kind of deal with the ruins afterwards. You know, goodness, I'm actually thinking there's so much we can see from here. Maybe we won't even go wandering down. Maybe we can just actually kind of talk about the big picture as we're sitting here on Weathertop. That would be actually kind of fun. Oh, okay, I'm trying to look due south, but this buttress here is in my way. Hang on. We're going to get a good view to the south. If I sneak up here. You can't fall off here, can you?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Maybe you can in this side.
Maybe you can on this side, yeah. I want to be careful. I don't want to have to climb all the way back.
Let's toss a dwarf and find out.
Exactly. Okay, so here to the south, we see the hills to the south. There's another ruin. So we've got the one big ruin south of the road, another ruin north of the road and much closer that we were looking at off to the east. Here's another ruin down to the south, but that's not... no. Okay, that is different from the one that we were in. That one, that's Minas Ariel over there. If we look off to the east. Hang on, let me go around this. See if we can get a better view over here. Yeah, this will be better. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, this is great. Okay. So that is the ruin that we were in the... Yes, it is. That's the ruin that we were in the week before last. The one with all the... Oh, yes, somebody just proved that you can, in fact, fall off there. Okay.
And he died.
That was a noble sacrifice in the interest of science there.
Indeed. Well, he's a hobbit, so in
There
the
you
only
go.
matters half.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that is that first ruin, which we saw was an Arthedanian ruin. Okay. Well, now let's look back to Frodo's view, which is the one that we were trying to look at before last week. Okay. Yeah. Now we can see all the way back to Bree. We could at nighttime before we could only see right to the border of Bree, and now we can see all the way. There's the whole extent of the Midgewater Marshes, and there's the beginnings of Bree Hill there coming up above the marsh right over there. If we come all the way to this side, can we begin to see any of Bree Town itself, actually? Not too much. A little misty off in the
Chetwood,
distance
I think.
there. Yeah. You can see the trees of the Chetwood rising up above it. You're right. Yeah. Okay. So here we are reenacting Elendil standing up here and watching for the coming of Gil-galad. But then again, he would have had this really nice tower to go up and look from, so he could have seen even further from there. So you can't see anything like back towards the Shire. The Shire is off in the blue distance, just like it was for Bilbo. The Ringwraiths would have been congregating down. I mean, again, scale is not the same. We can see the Forsaken Inn really close there. Presumably, the Forsaken Inn is a good deal further away than it looks here in the game. but you've still got to think that they were... Well, no, this really does kind of remind you, and I know I was talking about this last week too, but this was something I was noticing in the text as well. When they see the Black Riders are on their side of the hill, like the same side that their camp is on. So the emphasis is on the closeness of the riders. They're not right on top of them, but they are very close by. Yeah. Okay.
Are these trees supposed to be there, or like there should be more barren land where they could easily see the riders approaching, or is it normal that there are trees down there?
Well, there are only a few trees here and there, which does match the description that we get. It's not totally treeless necessarily. Even when Strider talks about the land to the north of the road being open, I don't think that necessarily means that there is not a single tree. It just means that there isn't forest that you could hide in. I mean, if you were down there, if you imagine somebody down there like trying to run from tree to tree, concealing themselves, it wouldn't work very well, right? Anyway, so I'm looking now from this vantage point. I'm now looking historically, right? I'm now looking with a special interest in ruins and thinking about what we see. Remember that it was a frontier, right? Weathertop, was a frontier. We know that this tower was in the hands of the kingdom of Arthedain, coming down from Fornost. And they were the ones that we saw up by Bree, and they were also the ones, Minas Ariel down there in the south, off to our left as we're standing here on Weathertop. That was Arthedanian too. So, if we continue around, let's look up to the north in the direction that the hobbits and Aragorn came from, because let's see that. Oh boy, it's hard to get there. Okay, I'm getting a tooltip here. Thank you. All right. Okay. Now from here, we have those smaller towers down and to the left, so that's to the northeast. So that was presumably part of the Arthedanian fortifications. That's where Kendaith is over there, right? Yes, that's the line where the road comes down. If we look off there to the northwest, that's that sort of protected line. Those are presumably Arthedanian ruins as well, which means that to the east of here and to the north I see no ruins, even on those remote hills. But we have this one very close.
I wonder what this was.
Well, I've got to think. We have yet to go down and explore that. But I'm going to guess that that's a Rudauran fortress. Because the way that Weathertop and the defensive line leading up to it, which the road that they were following south, was described, made it sound like this is really the frontier. That the enemy was based nearby. So I'm going to guess that very nearby ruin there is probably a Rudauran ruin. We'll see if that turns out to be true. Now, what I wonder is... Well, of course, I wonder if that's actually true. But then when we look out, we can see 3 other ruins, right? We can still see it kind of around the corner here. There's the one that's directly down to the southeast, which we can barely see around the corner here, right? That's way up on the hills. We see the other one that is down, the other big ruin down to the south of the road. And we can't actually see very much of Oscaruth at all, though we know where it is. but we know there's another ruin up there to the north of the road. So my question is, what would have been the history of this? As I say, I suspect that this one right down here below us probably belonged to Rudaur, which means that Ostgaruth probably belonged to Rudaur as well. But those ones in the south, I wonder. Minas Ariel, to the southeast of here, was Arthedanian. Are these two? That seems possible. I wonder if the road was part of the frontier. This is what I'm going to be interested to see as we continue to explore these ruins moving forward. Because I love putting together the story, because in general I have found, there have been some exceptions to this and things which look like they might be which looks like it might be mistakes or something. But most of the time I have found that when they lay out the landscape, they do so in a really interesting and thoughtful way. Like they're thinking about the history. They're not just randomly placing ruins. So in making the landscape, so of course they're telling, the Lotro developers are telling a story, of course, with the quest lines and everything else that they do. But even the way that they lay out the landscape tells an interesting story. So I see those 4 ruins that I want to look at, and there's, we can't see it. There's that bridge, right? Can we see the bridge? Isn't there a bridge?
The broken bridge?
No, not the one on the road. That one we can barely see.
Oh.
Yeah, there it is. That bridge that road up on the hills goes from, because that's right off of Minas Ariel. Then there's that little bridge. I'm looking now due south from where we're standing right now. We can see that little bridge that spans the gulf there in the hill. So right on the left hand side, on the western edge, that's where that little camp was, where we ended the day when we looked at Minas Ariel. And then that road, we follow it up, leads to that large span, that large bridge over there. We didn't get there. So I want to go up there and I want to look at that ruin up on the hill. I'm going to call it, I think that's an Arthedanian ruin. I think that's an Arthedanian fortress. Probably built after the split with Rudaur and during the conflict. That's going to be my guess. Yes, the Lorn Span. I knew it had a name, Ganetta, but I couldn't remember what it was. I think that's the Lorn Span there. Designed to create communication with Minas Ariel down here. But the interesting thing, therefore, you see, is that you can go back and forth between these two fortifications on these highly defensible hilltop paths without getting to the road. You see, this is why I think the road and the valley in which the road runs is the sort of zone of contention here. And I think that Arthedain is extending itself here on the south in order to create a larger frontier. So let's go to, and then that one down there further down off to the west, south of the road. I'm not sure. That one could go either way.
Here's the question.
Okay.
During the time that Aragorn was leading the hobbits in these areas, were these fortresses occupied by orcs, or is that just an innovation of the game?
That's an innovation of the game. And of course, the timing is... so there are two things, right? Two ways in which... Because there are not camps of orcs, of course. I mean, there are many places in the game where we can find large camps of orcs quite near to places where the company traveled, right? Without noticing any huge camps of orcs in the book. And so there are two different mechanisms by which we are... the game seems to ask us to sort of accept that, right? One is that it asks, sometimes it does seem to ask us to believe that this was happening and the Fellowship just didn't see it, right? That, when they passed through, they just didn't, there's this other stuff going on, because it's not like they were exploring everywhere, right? Trying to find out what's going on in every part of the map that they're going through. They were keeping to themselves a lot of time, right? They're on the run, in fact. So, something could be, some mischief could be happening in these lands that they were totally unaware of, as Strider is trying to mind their own business and keep them coming through here stealthily. So that's one thing that the quest lines sort of ask us to believe at times. Another is that this is stuff that's happened since the Fellowship came through. We're not really far behind the Fellowship, but we are a little bit behind the Fellowship. Yes. So it's true that we are asked to believe that some things have been developing, some stories have been proceeding since then. And in particular, one of these stories seems to be the movement of Saruman's forces, right? Saruman's increasingly open invasion of the North and trying to establish his power throughout Eriador here is one of the bigger picture stories that the game is putting forward, and I've always loved that story. I think that that's really smart, and in thinking through it that way, I really do think that they're thinking exactly the kind of way that Saruman would be thinking, and they're having him do just the kind of thing that I think he would have done had Tolkien worked out that part of the story, which he really didn't. So I like that, and I'm totally willing to suspend disbelief to that extent, to say that, like, well, since the Fellowship has gone, things have changed, because what they're pretty good at is keeping the overall arc, right? We know that Saruman is spreading his influence. We know things that happen in the story are indicators that this is on the way, right? The refugees coming up the Greenway, the sort of dubious refugees who may or may not be refugees, right? Those, we know many of them to be spies of Saruman. So Saruman is already sending spies. Will there come a time before long when he's going to start sending armed forces? We know that he does that to the Shire, right? He sends more and more ruffians up to the Shire. Those are the ones who are initially hired by Lotho Pimple, but then who sort of take over in the Shire. So the Saruman's plan to exert his influence in this area is alluded to in the books, but it's still subtle when the Fellowship goes through. And yet we know when they return that it got a lot less subtle, right? We know that the brigands attacked Bree. We know that they have taken over in the Shire. And Saruman himself has come to take personal command of that. So imagining these intermediary steps between those things, right? And therefore imagining that we as the players, when we come through these areas, are seeing those intermediate steps, are seeing that there have been some orc and half-orc troops who owe allegiance to Saruman, who have come into this area after Strider and the hobbits have departed from it. That's something, that's certainly something I'm definitely willing to play along with. And it does do an interesting job of conveying the sense that the book gives us very clearly at the end, right? Which is, it was a near thing, right? The whole North could have been destroyed, but the North has been spared. And of course, part of the fun of the game is being one of the people that helps to spare the North from that. So you say, well, if there are all these orc camps up here, why didn't they just, totally sack Breeland? And therefore wouldn't Gandalf and the hobbits have noticed it when they came back, right? Well, no, because we, the PCs, have thwarted them, right? That's the whole idea, and that's what's...
Indeed, we're part of the story. We
Exactly.
are part of the defense of Middle-earth.
And that, in my mind, is one of the cleverest elements of their adaptation. Did you not notice a reference to this in the book? Well, that's because, fortunately, the PCs were here to take care of it, right? And if we hadn't completed all those quests, then it would have been in the book. Then the book would have been different. So I think that's really I think that's really fun. I really love that element.
That whole storyline in Volume 2, where Aragorn does call the Rangers, and we have
Yes.
to make decisions and decide for them whether we want to leave the Ranger to protect that area, or are they going to answer the call of their lord and go to Helm's Deep. So that totally makes sense, that they had to leave people behind to protect. The North is not forsaken by all the Rangers, so they were still enemies here, but they were also allies here who remained behind and protected and did what they could.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. No, I think that is very, very clever stuff. And I really love the way that the story works out there. Well, we are running out of time. I was tempted to scamper down and look at one of the ruins, but that would probably be foolish. I think we'll do that next time. So having gotten an excellent skyward view here tonight of the land, and think. So again, I'm going to predict, I think what we're going to find when we go down there is south of the road is going to be Arthedain and north of the road is going to be Rhudaur. So we'll see if my prediction comes true. Or rather, if my reading of the ruins in the landscape from the distance here turns out to be accurate or not. Okay, so I'm going to sign off here. Thanks everybody for joining me. So glad I could be with you guys here at a Europe-friendly time. I promise I'll try not to make it that long again before the next time we do this.
Hopefully we'll have another one soon.
Yeah. Feel free to remind us to do that. Sometimes I get so wrapped up in my routine that I forget about it. So yeah, we definitely like to do this every once in a while. Great to see a fresh set of faces here tonight, and some names that I know but haven't seen in a while here in the live stream. So thanks everybody for joining me, and I will see you guys next week. Bye now. Thanks for joining me on this epic exploration of The Lord of the Rings and of Standing Stone's video adaptation of Tolkien's story. If you are having even half the fun I'm having on this journey, I hope you will consider supporting the project by donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.